I don't have any remarks prepared, but I think
Speak up.
I mean, I think it's great to see new ideas, and I agree entirely that we've been stagnating. And we know now that Oslo doesn't work. Oslo is not providing any solutions. Oslo is actively being undermined on both sides. It's not going to be the way forward. We need new ideas. A one-state solution will never be agreed to by Israel. A two-state solution will never be satisfactory for Palestinians, will never provide security for Israel. So it's great to see new ideas.
Why are you so sure about this? I mean, you say this as a fact. So do I, but...
Right. I think living here has convinced me of those things. I mean, I've been to Palestine. I've seen the wall. You can't have a country when it's cut off from electricity supplies, water supplies. You can't have a viable Israeli state with security when it's 12 miles across. Living here, Palestinians need the right to return. They need a government. Oslo has not provided the Palestinian Authority has no legitimacy. Palestinians here and in Palestine have no interest in Fatah and the results that Oslo has yielded. And the Palestine Papers have really been the nail in the coffin. The last 2 or 3 months with the WikiLeaks of the Palestine Papers have really shown that there's no. I just don't think there's any hope for Oslo, and I think that Netanyahu is ensuring that. There's plenty of blame to go around. It's not important who is at fault for that, but it's not working. That's my opinion, and I think Jordanians and Palestinians alike would agree with me on that.
What about, for example, those refugee camps here in Jordan from the Palestinians?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. This is at least my experience. If you travel around in the Arabic countries, they don't like the Palestinians so much. Do they?
Okay, well it's a very sensitive question here. In Jordan, the majority of the population is of Palestinian origin, and if there were a right to return, many of them would go back to Palestine. Many of them would stay here because they have a life here now, but would still remain true to their Palestinian heritage. So Palestinians, there are still societal divides between Jordanians and Palestinians, but overall, Palestinians in Jordan have had by far the best circumstances of Palestinians in any Arab country. They all have citizenship except for about 200,000 who have their roots in Gaza, and those are mostly in the Jerash refugee camp about an hour north of here. So there are issues between Jordanians and Palestinians in Jordan, but...
what are these issues about, from your point of view?
Okay, there's so many. One is that the civil service has been one of the biggest sources of employment, and it's been largely closed off to Palestinians. The vast majority of civil servants are of Jordanian origin. At the same time, Palestinians have had enormous success in the private sector, and some Jordanians are resentful because they see that Palestinians only want to employ other Palestinians. So you hear both sides go back and forth on that. Another issue is that the election law that's currently in place gives much greater representation to rural areas, which are of Jordanian, with roots in the Bedouin Jordanian society, whereas urban areas, which tend to have much higher Palestinian representation, have much more diluted representation. So it's basically decreased political power and decreased access to employment in the public sector, which would include also the military. So those issues are at play, and there is racism on both sides. But overall, from my perspective, where I work in a private school. I sit in the teachers' lounge every day. Muslims, Christians, Jordanians, Palestinians, they're best friends. They're great friends. So the issues are not. It's not universal, but it is. There are remaining issues, but it's not universal. It's not everywhere, and it's not immediately apparent. If you don't know what to look for, you won't have to see it. So yeah, all of that being said, I found the idea very, very interesting. I think for me, the biggest objections are I was really impressed how systematic, you know, like here's why geography isn't a problem. Here's what we're going to do about citizenship. Here's what we're going to do about the military. Things like that. I thought it was well thought through and researched, and like you said, in a very straightforward manner, with said in few words. I think for me the main objection is I don't know that Americans or Palestinians or Israelis want that particular solution. You know, like I can't imagine American citizens saying we want Palestinians to be part of our country. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying that
It's just unbelievable.
yeah, right. Which isn't to say that it's a bad idea or that it's not good to have new ideas. I think we need new ideas, but yeah, that's my speech.
How do you feel here in you are American, holding American passport.
Yep.
How do you feel here in an Arabic country?
Oh, I feel Amman is home to me. Like I have done a decent amount of traveling, you know, throughout the region, and every time I fly back into Amman, I'm home, which is great. I have the first time I lived here, I was a student, and I lived with a couple of different families, and I like
Arabic families or
yeah, of course, yeah. A Muslim family and a Christian family, and they're both like they're still my family. You know, like I can go have lunch with them anytime I want. You know, I feel like I have family here. I have good friends like Akram here. I have a job here. You know, my life right now is here, and I feel very, very comfortable, very safe, very welcomed, very appreciated. Yeah.
because many Americans, I mean, when you talk to them in America, they just feel like, you know, going to a different planet. If you suggest them going to
Right. Oh, yeah, I mean, the most frequent response that I get when I say I live in Jordan is like, oh, is it safe there? Like, be safe. Which is funny to me because, you know, people are watching the protests saying, Betsy, be safe. And in the meanwhile, they have like 2 feet worth of snow on the ground and they could die in a snow. You know, like, the crime rates in Los Angeles are so much higher than they are in Amman. Like, they're like, life is dangerous everywhere, you know, and Amman is a very safe city, except for traffic. And like I've never had safety issues here. I've always felt very well protected, very welcomed. Like this is home for now. This is where I live. So.
So, what is your take on the perspective America has on the Middle East?
I mean, we have our government and our people, and Jordanians are wonderful about pointing out that they're not the same thing, which is very nice of them. It's very generous of them to not make me equivalent to my government. But like I think American people view the Middle East as like those people over there, and it's just kind of like a dangerous, muddled mess. That's how Americans view. Yeah, would you agree? Like it's just like the Middle East is over there and it's dangerous, and like Israel and Palestine, like most Americans have a favorable view of Israel, more so than of the Palestinians and of Arabs, which is a shame. But I think that Americans want to see peace, but don't want to have to pay a price for it. And even though we're paying a price for there not being peace, of course, but I don't think Americans would be willing to like actually roll up their sleeves, which is a shame.
What do you see any change in the foreign policy now with Obama?
No. I see a different attitude. There's a different I like to say Obama is a good feeling, like hope and change and things like that. And domestically, I think he's done some phenomenal things. I mean, in the last week there have been some policy shifts that I think are commendable. But internationally, I mean, Guantanamo is still open. Like, we can call it combat or not combat. We still have troops in Iraq. Obama has announced in the last month that he wants to increase arms sales, which seems like one of the worst ideas I've ever heard. Like, look what U.S. arms are being used to do now, and he wants to increase weapons sales. So I don't think, you know, being really wishy-washy, especially in Egypt, not supporting the revolution from the get-go was like a huge mistake, I think.
Libya.
Yeah. He just announced sanctions last night.
Did he finally?
He did. And sanctions were in place by about 3 a.m. our time. So about the time we were landing. Which is actually pretty speedy for, no one else has announced sanctions. Like, I'll give him that. I don't think Obama is a huge foreign policy shift at all. I think he's a different attitude, but not a major shift. And I'm not sure like what he's supposed to get done. There's constraints.
But if you are actually differentiating between people and government, this would drive such an idea, wouldn't it?
It could. Yeah. What does somebody else think? Get out of the hot seat.
Peter spent some time here. You should ask him.
May I just move them over there so to get...
Just playing musical
Can you
chairs.
just change?
Basis, then gives a nominal approval or disapproval to that law, and only sits for some months of the year. So many in the last few years, many laws have been passed without the approval of Parliament, simply because they haven't been sitting. Parliament was dissolved in 2009 by the King because it was corrupt, and the basis on which it was elected was flawed, substantially flawed. The 2010 elections provided some improvements.
In which ways?
Well, human rights campaigners and so on would say that the extra quota for women and for minorities were improvements. I would call them more like SOPs in order to disguise the fact that the system is still basically unfair. They introduced a complex system which doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, which divides each of the constituencies into sub-districts. And those sub-districts, for me, allow the government to exert an undue amount of control over who wins each seat. Because basically, someone has to choose which candidate stands in which seat against which other candidate. And so it is an opportunity. I have no evidence to say that it was systematic. Yeah, but it seems that particularly, Amman 3rd District, for example, is where we are now. It seems that one pro-Palestinian candidate was pitted against a very pro-Jordanian, East Bank Jordanian candidate, which plays into the identity politics that Betsy touched on earlier. So that kind of identity politics is something that can be manipulated cynically.
So the relationship between the King's family and Parliament is... the King is the King, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And his power is largely based on the tribal dynamic in Jordanian politics, which is the primary dynamic when deciding which candidates win in the election, because your tribe votes for you, and that's it. Right? The tribes decide on a candidate, or hopefully decide on a candidate. Sometimes they don't manage, and then he's elected to Parliament, and he represents that tribe in Parliament. And there is a way in which that harms the ability of Parliament to discuss national issues, because most MPs simply read out a list of demands for their constituency or for their tribe. So it's about services rather than about ideology or policy.
Okay. How do you think can the EU or...
That is a very good question. That is a very, very good question. The EU has a lot of money here, and it has a very large delegation, and it funds a lot of projects.
What kind of projects?
Human rights projects, primarily capacity building in Parliament and elsewhere. It's very active, and there recently, most importantly, I think recently there's been a trade agreement signed in October of 2010, which built upon the previous trade agreement. Broadly speaking, they go by 5-year plans, and so 2005 one introduced a limited degree to which taxes were broken down, and there was a free trade area between the two sovereignties. And then that's increased in 2010. So the result is there has been a marked increase in Jordanian exports to the EU just in the last year. which is incredibly good news for Jordan because the ability to export its products, which has been limited by the tax burden to the EU before,
But
is
who
good
is-
news.
Who is benefiting from this?
Well, Jordanian people who want to sell stuff to the EU, that's definitely a benefit. The EU can have cheaper products, it increases competition within the EU, so it's good news all round. And
That's the Peter Hagen perspective.
yeah, exactly. But it's not solely economic as well. There's a degree of political influence that the EU demands in return for this, of course. This is how the EU operates. And that influence is used for things like capacity building in Parliament. In fact, Jordan as an interlocutor between Western countries and countries with which the West is less willing to deal.
How would you describe in this field the position of the US or England, which is actually more closer in these questions to the US than to the EU? At least it's my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, one interesting question for me is the relative influence of each of the embassies here. So the EU has a lot of money and does a lot of projects, but its political influence is relatively little. I think that's partly because of the mission of the EU doesn't necessarily require old-fashioned political influence. Partly because the EU is a less effective political organisation than individual nations anyway. The US has huge influence and a huge aid budget, two facts which are not unconnected. Britain, by contrast, has a very low aid budget, almost nothing, and yet maintains a very, very high influence in terms of having the ear of the king and so forth, which is partly due to the historical relationship between the two countries.
Yeah.
I think. So in Jordan, you can see those dynamics played out quite substantially.
And would you consider Jordan could play a key role or some kind of key role in finding a solution for the Israel-Palestine conflict?
I think it already does play a certain role, and that is, first of all, to draw attention back to the Middle East peace process rather than Iran or other Middle Eastern issues. That's something that I've been told directly by Jordanian diplomats. They say our primary goal here is to refocus attention upon the Middle East peace process. Their role largely stems from their moderate stance on the Middle East peace process, which I think is an overwhelmingly good thing because there aren't that many moderates in this part of the world. And so its role is broadly positive from my view. How it can be made into a major role, I have no idea. I think it's destined to be a junior partner.
And one issue that Jordan faces in trying to be a part of the peace process is that a substantial portion of the population does not support Jordan's role in the peace process. There are many who say we do not recognize, many citizens privately who say we don't recognize Israel's right to exist and we don't want a peace treaty. And the king last summer stated, our peace treaty is next to nothing. Like, it's not providing the Jordanians with the benefit. And so since 1994, when King Hussein passed it, Jordanians, not all, but many, think that the peace treaty is a bad thing. And there has been significant detriment, against the health and the status of the peace treaty since then. So that's definitely going to be an obstacle.
Are Jordans allowed to travel easily to Palestine?
Again, please.
Can you travel easily to Palestine?
No, it's like a little bit less hard than going to the US. For a natively Jordanian, it's like going to a country in Europe, like just going to England or any other country, because we need clearances from the embassy, the Israeli embassy, which include a lot of security checks, especially for a natively Jordanian guy like me, that have no relatives or no just family back in Palestine. So what are you going to do in Palestine or Israel? So it's a big question, and most likely that it's very hard to get a visa to go there. And this goes both ways of West Bank and Israel.
Okay. So, give me one take on this 2 stars for peace, on this idea you briefly got.
I think it is scuppered by precisely the reason that Betsy highlighted, which is that none of the parties would accept those two countries being part of the United States. The United States would think it was an incredibly bad idea. Palestinians would despise it, and I can't imagine the Israelis would be too pleased with it. So,
Why? Give me some reasons.
well,
I mean, there are many reasons in there why they should actually.
well, okay, so there might be economic or cultural or political advantages, but that's not the basis on which people in these countries would decide. The basis on which these people would decide would be national identity, essentially emotional reasons. So Palestinians who have an imperfect or slightly sceptical view perhaps of the United States anyway, would be unwilling to take part in a country that they saw as financing Israel and their oppression. So the Palestinians would be the most against it, I would imagine. Israel, I imagine, would want to retain its national identity because it's a Jewish state, and they regard themselves as being, a modern nation. Why should they submit to the United States? Now, as for United States popular opinion, maybe there might be some people around the edges of the United States who think it was amusing, if not possible idea. But if you get to the hot bits in the middle, where people tend to be a bit more old-fashioned in their views, I think they would object strongly to the idea of Arabs being part of an Arab country being part of the United States.
Do you have any reasons, Dirk, why they should do it?
I mean, one part is the relationship between Israel and the US anyway, that the US covers a lot of the security aspects of Israel. So it could be a question that it's a safe option to join the US, to have them secure Israel. That could be a reason for it, I think.
But that could be achieved with an extension of their pre-existing or already existing defence treaties and defence arrangements.
I don't know, but I think that Israel is being treated much better than a state in the United States. Let's say to the benefits being taken by Israel from the United States. I don't think that Ohio have 20 F-35 Eurofighter just jet fighters in any of its airports. But if you look to Israel, they have now they signed a treatment for 20 of these jets. If you look to the just money being given yearly to Israel, it is much more than any country in the world. And let's say that maybe you can find states that in the United States that don't have very good relation within the federal government of the United States, like the relation that it's have been held with Israel. If we look to the influence of Israel in the Congress or in the White House, also I don't think that you will have some states in the United States that don't have the same influence as Israel has in the Congress or to the lawmakers in the United States or the White House policy through years. So to go straightly to the point of two states for peace, I think as all genuine creative idea, it's completely crazy, and just idea through the history which held such an influence in the human being history will have such amount of creativity and craziness, let's say, as this idea held.
What is so crazy?
Just to have, for me as a Jordanian, to have the United States 50 miles from here is quite strange and quite challenging and quite, let's say, somehow cheerful. To just I can cross the River Jordan and I will be in USA. So wow. But
what would be wrong with this?
No, nothing, completely nothing. But for me, but just let's look at a bigger picture now.
But stay here for a moment. Why would it be so crazy? Just imagine crossing the Jordan River and you could walk in.
So it will be a solution for that. a nominal solution for the problem that we're facing here. But look at other side. If just let's say that for Jordanian from Palestinians origins, if they wanted to travel back to visit their relatives in the USA next to the just next side, so it will be very hard to visit, very hard to go there, and relation will be all politics, all relation, all treatments within the region will be to rewritten again with completely different aspect, and just it will be very hard. But I'm gonna.
But it's hard anyhow, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm gonna share something with Betsy from what Betsy said, and
If you could
Peter.
talk a little bit.
Peter, about just the people of the US, people of Israel, and people of Palestine will say no to it. I think just by being a guy from here, I think that I know the mentality of people here a little bit more. I will say that Palestinian will say okay. Many of them.
We'll say okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for what reasons do you think so?
Too much benefits. To give a people without, let's say, with many rights being taken from them. Most important, the land, the rights, the citizenship, the just nominal rights that any people on planet must have it. Most likely Palestinians don't have it, which is at the sub-level, which is a country of their own. They don't have it. So by having a state, a Palestinian state, within a much bigger state, which is the greatest country in the world in many people's opinion, will be a very fanatic thing and very just great thing to happen. Just shifting from just the bottom to the top of the equation in the world. But if I looked also to the Israelis, I will say 50-50. You will find many Israelis, secular Israelis, will say, yeah, why not? We have relation with the U.S. more than any country in the world, and we have their money, we have their guns, we have just many of Israelis already have the U.S. citizenship. So it will be. But if we look to the radical Israelis, radical Jewish Israelis, we will see no. We will see a no more likely, because they will lose the idea of their Jewish state. If there will be a two-state solution, there will be a lot of borders in political and geographical terms. It will be very hard to travel between the two states. But if these two states became a part of the United States of America, the movement, the relation in general will be very, very, very friendly, more friendly and more brotherly.
Yeah.
But like, you don't care a lot if you moved from Ohio to Chicago or to Illinois, but I can't see it between Palestinian and Israelis. The most important part that will American accept it, and this is the biggest answer. Let's say that the American want it, the Israeli want it, and the Palestinian want it, and everyone is okay and happy with that. America may solve a problem in this important part of the world, but it is going to open a gate to every nation on earth that have problem with the nation next to it to ask for the U.S. to make us part of you, and we will solve this problem. So imagine many parts of the world asking for a U.S. solution in the kind of two states for peace. I believe this. When I look to the Israeli-Palestinian problem, I don't look a very hard equation to solve. But what makes it harder is that the U.S. and let's drop Europe for a while. Let's say that the U.S. is playing. It's not just, let's say, an equation solver more than it is another problem within the equation. They're making it worse more than they're trying to solve it. So if we look to, like, especially in the Bush era, during the last decade, we had only within the Middle East, most likely we had only the Palestinian issue, but within 10 years, almost likely 8 years of just Bush administration in power, just look at it now. if we even look through 2006 during the Lebanese Second War with Israel, Israeli for a while we want to stop shooting, but Condoleezza Rice and Bush at that time were pushing, no, you can't stop now, you need to push. So, Obama now is, as Betsy said, is more likely like a good feeling to the US, but for us here, we didn't find any change in anything now.
What?
So, just if we looked also to the Israeli-Palestinian issue, I can't see but a dead end. It can't be solved. No, just not anymore. Something radical needs to happen. Just an earthquake, a meteor just going down, or something like that to solve some problem. But who goes to the West Bank? Who goes to Israel or go to West Bank? We'll see just a very radical buildings, feelings, beliefs go around both sides, and everyone is claiming for that it is his right. Palestinians are asking to go back home, which is the biggest right in the world, to go back to your home. They're asking to their whole sides to be respected. They're asking for the free movement. They're asking basically for just basic rights to any kind of people to have their own states. But if we look to Israeli and Israeli policy, I will see a very spoiled states that not asking for just. Israel will not ever get satisfaction from what is going on and what can it have from the just surroundings. It has the biggest victories in policies by signing 2 peace treaties with Israel and with Egypt and Jordan, and with just Palestinian politicians almost just giving what remains from the West Bank to give to them, with just please to make any kind of states, and until now it's no, it's a big no. Even some, after 15 years of peace with Jordan, the Israeli Congress, Knesset, is asking for just kicking out the Palestinian to Jordan, and some of them who say no to that land because they said no because they want Jordan part of Israel. They just, why to give the Palestinian Jordan? It's our own. Why to give it to them? And it is. I'm not saying that it's like a public feeling. I'm saying about the top level of politicians in Israel. And why can't we get along? Why, just like me, I'm an anti-Israel activist. I'm not saying that the problem between Jordan and the Arabian, the Arabian countries and the Arabian people, most important, their problem with Israel is, let's say, it's in the cellular level. It's in the people's level. I'm not saying that King Abdullah hates Netanyahu or no, just people hate people. Actually, people hate people.
Why is it so?
Let's go back to the story where everybody come from, which is a very hard question to ask. It's a very long story to be told. So I can't see any solution given without just, I can't see a better Middle East with Israel in it. Just Palestinian even said yes to one-state solution. If you wanted to have a one-state Israelis with Palestinian, we're okay with that. But Israelis said no, hell no.
So what is the role of the Jordans here? I mean, you were pointing out U.S., you were pointing out Palestine, and
but I didn't mention Jordan. Yeah, let's say that Jordan, in the meantime, and let's say that in the last 30 years was more likely the catcher more than the pitcher. So we receive events more than making it. Back in this, let's say, most likely the 40s and 50s, we used to make events, yes. But now, due to unfortunate, unprofessional foreign policy by several governments going on, and just most likely the policy is being done by the king, and we will receive events, we will not make it up to the moment. If something radical didn't happen in Jordan, we will still receive events. Like, for example,
What do you mean you will receive it?
if let's say that Israelis went crazy and kicked out all Palestinian, I'm not saying from the West Bank, I will say out of Israel, where shall they go? Jordan. I am natively Jordanian. I'm not from Palestinian origins. Most Jordanians will not accept more Palestinians to come because Palestinians will ask for more power. They're asked to make their own governments. So Jordania most likely will lose any kind of power. And until just now, we call ourselves Red Indians because we are respecting just natively Jordanian. They call them Red Indians because Red Indians because we expect that what happened to the Red Indians in the U.S. will happen to the natively Jordanian, that they lost their country at the end of the story. So.
And I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is that, I mean, every war in the Middle East creates an outflow of refugees. I mean, so obviously we have 500,000 Iraqis who ended up in Jordan and have been here. Many of them came with lots of money, but after 6 years without legal employment, they're desperate and dependent on NGOs and or state support. That's just one example. The Persian Gulf War, again, there was about 500,000 people who were displaced by that conflict and they came here. Every time there's a conflict, they end up here, and Jordan has no oil and no water. It's the 4th most water-impoverished country per capita. Every person who moves here is a strain on resources which are getting lower and lower and lower every year. Another 500,000 people from Palestine or anywhere else could be, you know, a drastic and catastrophic blow to the economy, where there's like only so much housing, only so much stuff, only so much room in the streets, and also where there's just no resources. So that's a huge issue. It's not just about political power. It's also just like this country cannot sustain an increasing population, and even like just the Jordanian population will double in about 30 years. Over half the population is under the age of 25. Like, this country just cannot sustain more refugees. So that's another factor.
So what about the latest unrests here in Jordan? By what were they?
Unrests, like what?
People were going in the streets, weren't they?
I'm not calling that an unrest. No, just it's like I will call it like a very peaceful demonstration back in Hyde Park in London. Just I think if you called some other events as an unrest, I will say yes. But for just to have protesters in the Jordanian streets, it's a brand new thing. Yeah, but because
it's a brand new thing.
Yeah, because just the law since last week is changed, so people are allowed to be in the streets and protest. Before that, you will have to go through a very long progress to have to legalize a protest that you're about to do. So, yeah, this is the problem with, I'm sorry, to foreigner journalists or foreigner researchers, that they will come to Jordan for just a couple of days and they will say, okay, there is unrest happening. What kind of unrest? We didn't see people being hit. We didn't see people being just shooting each other. If I say something, if you said about tribal clashes in the last 2 years, I will say yes. I will call it an unrest. But regarding last protest, they're calling, yes, the first thing that any protest will say, the biggest slogan in the story will be, we are with the king. We're not against the king. We are with the king. But we need change to happen. Corruption is absolute. Some people mentioned that Jordanian exports to the EU was much better last year, but we didn't see the influence of such exporting to Jordanians. Most likely, this, for some ridiculous reason, any good thing that happened to Jordan, to its finance, it will have bad influence to its people. Like, for example, when the Iraqi came to Jordan with a lot of money, they didn't help Jordan to develop or to make some things become better. But otherwise, prices went very sharp that year, and it is until now. That's why. If, for example, by exporting vegetables from Jordan to Europe, we will have vegetable prices in Jordan will rise much higher than old days. So Jordanian have the same salary but with much higher prices, and now just they can't afford the lifestyle that they used to have in the last 100 years with the same amount of money that they're having now. So
globalization is actually hurting.
yeah. If the Jordanian army just decided for once to go to Palestine or something, you will have the whole country behind them. But otherwise, I'm not seeing any kind of policy that the Jordanian people will support regarding Israel. It's in my opinion, it's quite shame for Egypt or for Jordan or for other countries to have this huge gap between the people ideas and the policy of the governments or the policy of the king.
Okay.
So let's say that 70% of the people are totally against the peace treaty with Israel.
70%?
More. I believe more, but I'm giving 70% as just a very low number. But yes, from the beginning we started to say that the peace treaty is it's useless, especially with Israelis.
Yeah.
And but some politician was making their bets about, no, we can be friends with Israel, we can make good relations with Israel. But just through time, we didn't face any good point. Through 15 years of peace, we didn't have one single point good with having peace with Israel.
What went worse? What became worse?
Everything, most likely everything.
Prices are higher.
Yeah, if we looked in the policy before that, through 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, the no war, no peace situation between Israel and Jordan was much better. We're not friends, we're not enemies. Just everyone keep his own business and just stay away from me, which is very good in my opinion. But now, police force are much stronger than before. Violence being used against people, and let's say the aggressive attitude of people and everyone due to extreme pressure. Everyone is very hostile now. You can get in problem as a Jordanian. I can get in a very big problem for doing something silly with someone because he's very angry from life and from everything. I can be in a problem. So to vent such an event to vent such situation, such spirit being lived by Jordanians, I can't see anything but nothing like, let's say, a little conflict with Israel will vent a lot of us.
Do you think people will go more in the streets here in Jordan, and for what reasons?
Yes. If let's say unrest through the Arabian world continued, we will have more people asking here for more rights, not to the king to fall, but they're asking to make their own governments, to have a policy that truly represent Jordanians. But let's say the king is doing well since Tunisia. He felt that things are not going okay, and he started to give more power to the people. And let's say, I'm not saying more power, I'm saying more rights. Power is still, no more powers happens to Jordanian yet, but I think that unfortunately we are now having our basic rights of just expressing ourselves.
Do you have this right? Would you consider that Jordans have this right to express themselves? There is no censorship here.
It's self-censorship. So you can be punished for insulting the royal family. So people just don't touch the royal family. I mean, the vast majority of people have a very, very high opinion of the royal family, but if they don't, they wouldn't express that in like a public forum. But there's a lot of self-censorship. People don't want to. There was a poll that like 95% of Jordanian journalists reported that they practice self-censorship, just essentially not saying things negative about policies that come directly from the royal court, for instance. So you can criticize a policy, particularly if it's from a minister or if it's from the parliament. But if it comes directly from the royal court, you want to choose your words carefully. So there's, as compared with other Arab countries, the rights for self-expression here are great.
Wow.
And are getting better. Like in the last 2 months, there's been a lot more criticism, a lot more outspokenness, things that are kind of like, whoa, they just said that. But yeah, there's room for improvement. Yeah.
So I mean, when we talk about censorship or not censorship, we are very close to the topic of the social web.
Yeah.
Are you a blogger?
Yeah.
I pretty much like also your article about please everyone calm down.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
about an unrest.
Right.
And then also you wrote about Jordanians
Yeah. I mean,
being involved maybe somewhere else.
so there's just lots of forces at play. I mean, for one thing, I mean, as a foreigner, I can say things that Jordanians could say but might not feel comfortable saying. Most people would say things in English that they wouldn't want to say in Arabic. But I think, I mean, what we're seeing, English and in Arabic in the streets and at home, on Twitter, in the blogosphere, in articles, in the newspaper, is people being critical of governmental policies. But universally, what they're saying is we support the monarchy, we support the Hashemites, we support our king, but what we want is reform. And reform means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But whereas in Libya, in Egypt, in Tunisia, people were in the streets counting Ashab Yurid Asqat al-Nizam, the people want the fall of the regime. People here are saying Ashab Yurid Islah al-Nizam, which is the people want the reform of the regime. The people want the regime, like with some improvements. And the king went on national television last week and said, "You guys are right. The reform hasn't been taking place long enough, and I want this to happen now." And he set forth some timelines for some pretty drastic changes. So, like what we're seeing in Jordan is exactly the opposite, especially what we're seeing in Libya. The police forces are handing out coffee to protesters instead of shooting them, for instance. The king, instead of saying, you know, after it's way too late, saying I'm going to increase the pensions of public officials like Gaddafi did yesterday. Like, I'm sorry, you're a little too late. They want to kill you. Here, the king is saying, you know what, you're right, we need these reforms. I've been wanting these reforms, and we keep getting sidelined by issues across the river. So,
Unfortunately, he's a little bit 10 years late.
right. I mean,
Who?
Yeah, but late with an
Your king.
Yeah.
and he's the first one to say that. It's late. It's late. It's not soon enough. See that? The king is the first one to say that.
He was he's a special forces soldier. Just
yeah.
so this was a little bit influencing his policies. In foreign policy he was great. He's a very but in internal policies he was like a very tough policeman more than a very delicate politician. So we faced a lot of civil rights being lost. We faced a lot of the police forces were very enlarged and
By Abdullah.
Yeah. So
What is the role of the queen?
Paula may say something. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the Queen is very active in public life, and the Queen has a lot of initiatives, supporting, there's Madrasati, which is like supporting like rural schools in undeveloped areas, things like that. The Queen has, a disputed role in society. Western governments think she's amazing, she's very fabulous and well-dressed and all those things. As you're aware, there has been some reports from some tribal members that they're unhappy with her because she's seen as excessive and because she's a Palestinian origin. I have no idea what percentage of Jordanians might agree with that assessment, but the Queen is a disputed figure, I would say.
Come on.
Not much liked figure. Not a fraction from the king's popularity within.
Not a what?
Not a fraction, not even a fraction from the king's popularity within inside the Jordanian people.
Why?
Let's say the charisma somehow. The Jordanian charisma doesn't match very well with hers. We are very just as a natively Jordanian. I will say it. I will admit it. Many natively Jordanian also hate the idea. They don't hate the idea of being Palestinian. Just a Jordanian from Palestinian origins, but they hate the idea that she's giving more benefits to the camps, more benefits to the Palestinian from origins. I'm saying my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we're asking.
You're talking about general.
In general, they hate the idea of she's. I'm
Talk
not saying.
Talk about you, not about them.
Yeah, about me. Yeah, my father is a judge. My father is the judge. He's. So I see sometimes the influence of the king on the judicial power in Jordan. That, for example, I'm asking for women rights in general, but I'm not asking to force women rights and for the ladies to be overrated in Jordan. Like, for example,
What is overrated?
like for example, just in the judicial court or in judicial power, there is a plan being done by the queen to make. There is like now there's like 700 judges in Jordan. She has a plan to make 400 of them are girls, females. Yes.
This is
What?
scary. Is it scary for you?
Not scaring, but if she is qualified to be a judge, yes. But I'm not making her judge because she's a lady.
Okay.
This is
So
this,
the quota is going
yeah,
wrong.
yeah. I face. Also, I hate a few things like you should have a little bit sense of feeling with your people. Jordan is having a very tough financial situation. In the same time, you see her in some parties in Europe or in the US with some celebrities with more than $100,000 dress, Armani dress, or just this is too much for such a poor country like Jordan. Also, let's say that for her hairstyle, her charisma, her influence to educational ministry, to the educational system, to
Yeah.
everything
Which is pretty strong, huh?
doesn't
Yeah.
match. No, I'm not saying it's not strong. I'm not sure about the word, but she's very influential due to education in such a way that doesn't match entirely the Jordanian charisma. Like for just
What do you mean by this?
let's say that we are a country most likely being held on the shoulders of soldiers. So just like in school we used to have a lot of disciplines. We used to have a lot of it's like going to a very tough military school in the US or something like
Yeah.
that. But now teachers are very much due to new laws and new regulations due to education and things like that. They lost a lot of power within their schools. They are much less respected among the students. I'm saying things I'm not saying now as an activist. I'm saying that I'm talking now as a general, a normal Jordanian guy. Also, the thing that just the private sector schools in Jordan are just like there is a huge gap now between private schools and just public schools. For me, for a guy like me from a public school, it was like when I used to meet and to social with other students, it was like guys coming from the other planets. And if you look to all programs, I've been involved in many programs within inside schools. When you see very good, let's say, opportunities and very good programs being held within inside schools, and all of these opportunities are given to very high quality and prestigious schools, and all the other schools are just they're given nothing. It's quite a shame. So you have some kind of reforming to the educational system, but it's not. The good things are not implemented to the normal Jordanian people. They are implemented to like madrasati, like other schools, like other programs. They are being done most likely to prestigious school more than in private sector schools.
So just go back to this idea, 2 stars for peace. And just imagine that when you cross Jordan River, there is the US. What would be the biggest advantage for you as a Jordan?
I may have a chance to work in the US. That's yeah. Yeah. So I hope that they will cook much better burgers there. So it will be a very drastic change in my life to have US next to the river, next side of the river.
I actually have an idea to revise and improve this plan slightly.
Yeah,
The
we come.
the biggest problem seemed to be selling it to the American.
We are not
people.
going to. We don't want to sell it. So
Well,
just,
persuading the American
yeah.
people that they want to take part in it, and persuading the Palestinian people that they want to take part in it, and to some extent the Israelis as well. For the Palestinians, it's partly to do with their hatred of America. For America, it's to do with their suspicion of allowing Arabs into as part of their country. So take a more mediocre country. In England, we have shires, so why not have Palestine Shire and Israel Shire?
What?
Yeah, I mean the book is open for this idea.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
But I still prefer that. I find the one-state solution is, if something been very well worked in this solution, I think that we will have a much reasonable solution to be told. But I still think that 2 stars for peace is it's a quite revolutionary, quite creative idea to have, but
Let's talk
too
about.
many obstacles in the way. Too many.
For you, what are the obstacles? For you as a Jordanian, what are the disadvantages? Come on.
Disadvantages.
Yes. What are the disadvantages?
I hope that prices won't go sharp when US is next side of the river. I hope that we will reduce the number of population, especially from just non-Jordanian origins. So we will have much better opportunity to work and much better opportunity for our children to find some place and water to drink in the future.
So these are all advantages. What are the disadvantages?
Disadvantages?
Actually, you are
I hope that we
embracing the idea, aren't
I
you?
hope that we will not see a lot of Mexicans. just I'm sorry, just it's a joke. I don't see a very bad disadvantage coming on, but just if we just excluded that the idea of another sharp rise of prices in Jordan. Otherwise, I hope that the advantages will be much better, especially if the upcoming USA will find some solution for the water problem.
I think, from my perspective, Jordan has nothing to lose from a peaceful solution to Israel and Palestine, a peaceful solution. If there is a solution that involves any displacement of people, it will be a huge problem for Jordan. And I think, for me, the 2 biggest obstacles, there's so many big obstacles to this plan. One is, for me, besides Americans not being interested in protecting the Middle East and essentially extending its own borders to a very sensitive, fragile, and in our minds, very dangerous part of the world, is simply that Israel does not want to give up its sovereignty. If I'm Israel, I have nothing to gain by doing this because I have the best of all possible worlds. America is giving me guns, is giving me money. I'm a fully developed country. I'm basically just oppressing anyone who's inconvenient to me, and I don't have to pay any taxes to the U.S. government. I'm in no way responsible to the U.S. government, but I'm still getting the best military equipment free of charge.
But arguing against it could be that I don't think right now the Israelis are feeling so comfortable, which, you know, what's going on. They're kind of scared. And I think they do have the fear that they are losing their standing within the U.S. I mean, it could be a kind of comfort zone for them as well, you know, just get guaranteed such kind of status.
I think Israel knows that it's already guaranteed protection from the U.S. government and doesn't have the price to pay. There's the slogan right there that people want through. That's us. We're on Al Jazeera right now. I think Israel knows that it has security guaranteed by the U.S. without having to give up its sovereignty, without having to give up any issues of majority. And I think if anything, Israel thinks that it would be to its detriment to pull down the wall, to open its borders, because as soon as it becomes a state, it has to open its borders to Palestine. It has to allow the U.S. to regulate its borders, and that gives Israel much less control. And there are a good, not the majority, but about a quarter of of Israelis do not recognize that there is such thing as a Palestinian, and how can they live next door and have an open border? And and those people are so influential, both in their own government and in mine, unfortunately, that they will never allow that to go through. And
but isn't the reason for all the hate and the pain and the trouble between the two countries that this problem is not solved yet? So given that the two stars for peace would solve it, wouldn't it reduce the hate and the need for a border in between the two countries?
I don't think Israelis would view this as a solution, because it does not give it isn't a Jewish nation from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, which is what they want. And also, we haven't talked about this. I think it's important. I don't think other Arab countries would. I mean, I don't think there's much they could do if the U.S. decided it wanted to take over. There wouldn't be a whole lot that they could do.
Wait.
It's not the U.S. deciding.
But I just want to throw this out there.
Yes.
Syria and Iran, and many other countries in this region, like, there is nothing that they would like less than to have the U.S. right here. And if the U.S. is what is now Israel and Palestine, it borders on Syria. It borders Hezbollah. It borders. Just a few kilometers away from Iraq, from Iran, and these are all countries that, I mean, the U.S. is not known here as being a good force. The U.S. is not known in many of these countries for being friendly. All we've ever done is bombed these countries, and our relationships with many of these governments is not good. And I mean, even if all three parties agreed, there are other regional forces at play. It's not as simple as three countries. You know, it's a globalized world.
Again, look at Tunisia, look at Egypt, and even look at this so-called Green Revolution in Tehran a year ago.
Yeah.
No American flags were burned for the very first time because of the people. I think because of the people.
I mean, I've been at several of the embassies here, and Jordan is a country, like, I've never had issues as an American here. People have been very friendly to me. Every time I'm in a cab, the cab driver says, "We love American people, we don't like your government." And I've been at the embassies, and what people are saying, what people are chanting is "America, burra, burra, burra." We want America out, out, out. And people are not friendly to the American government, because they don't trust us to have their best interests in mind. I wonder why. I mean, the U.S. in this part of the world is known as being an imperialist power. And I mean, we've talked about how globalization here hasn't been to Jordanians' benefit. And that this is in a country that is very favorable to American people, and governmentally is friendly to the American government. I don't. In the broader spectrum of the region, people don't want more influence from the U.S. They want less.
Oh. Come on.
Yes.
We have to change seats again.
Okay.
Sorry, otherwise it's.
Yeah, but the two of us actually need to head out. We're doing a bit of traveling this afternoon. So, should I maybe forward you to it?
Here we go.
Okay, my name is Paula. I'm from Ohio, and I'm here in Jordan on a Fulbright.
So, we've been sitting around here for more than an hour now talking about these 2 stars for peace. What is your take on this as an American and knowing the country here?
It's not feasible for a lot of reasons. As an American, it's it's just not plausible. But I think first we would have to say that the solution overlooks, I think, one of the main issues, that Palestine and Israel are looking to have their own state, and to agree to become part of the United States is giving that up, essentially making the cause that they've both fought for so long not an issue anymore, which that's just not. I think that's the foremost issue that you would encounter.
Question: wouldn't a U.S. state also be a state, or is it not enough state?
I don't think it's enough state.
Okay.
I absolutely don't think it's enough state. I mean, Israel wants to be sovereign, as does Palestine, and I don't think that joining the United States would reconcile that at all.
How would you feel if Israel, as an American, how would you feel as an American, or how would you argue against or for this idea, being an American, that Palestine and Israel would join your flag?
if Palestine and Israel were to agree to it, I wouldn't have a problem as an American, but then again, I think I'm on the end of the spectrum that is more accepting of people joining the United States. If you want to, I'm going to say ahlan wa sahlan, you're more than welcome, if that's what you really want. But I don't think we would ever get to that point where it would come for the United States and the American citizens would have to
Argue from your point of view.
whether or not I would accept
Yes,
them.
yeah.
Sure, if you want to. If that's going to solve the problem, if you think that will solve your problem, you're more than welcome, is what I would say.
So why are there, from your opinion, what would be disadvantages if they would join, from your point of view?
I think there's a lot of disadvantages for the United States if they were
For you,
for me as a citizen.
as a citizen.
There aren't any disadvantages. I'm from Ohio. They would be over here. There would be a little interaction for me.
It's like Ohio here, isn't it?
I don't think there would be that much of an issue, other than it poses some problems to the United States government. But for me as a citizen from the Midwest, it's not a problem for me.
Would you consider the problem between Israel and Palestine, or between Israel and the Arabic world, is solved?
No.
Would you feel more comfortable then?
It wouldn't be. I mean, it wouldn't be solved though. To me, that's not a solution. It's an easy way out, because it's a temporary solution. If you let them become states of the United States, it doesn't answer what they really want. It would last for maybe a decade before they would each want independence again. That's what they're really after.
Okay.
And moreover, it overlooks the problem of reconciliation. It would be like Ohio and Indiana. Those two groups of people have to be able to live with each other and have to be able to cross borders and to live in peace. And I don't think that you can draw a line between the two, make them United States in the United States and expect them to live like that. If that were possible, it would have already happened within the past 60 years, but it hasn't. And you have to go through an entire reconciliation process, and I don't think that that's feasible just by making them states within the United States. To expect them that, okay, now you're part of the United States, let's all get along, let's overlook what has happened in the past, it wouldn't happen. I feel more of a responsibility to speak on behalf of the United States, because if I were at home in Ohio, there's other Americans who can speak for themselves, other Ohioans who can speak for themselves, but because that isn't the case here. And I actually had that conversation with a lot of foreigners that if you ask them, because they're not in their own society, will feel more obligated to represent the country that they're coming from.
Because in Germany there's a public discussion about a new idea how to reduce or to change the welfare system. Kind of every citizen in Germany should get a certain amount of minimum money to live as human right. And when they ask people on is this feasible, what do you think? Would it work? Would you still go to work even if you get money? Everyone says yes, I would work, of course, also if I get money from the state. But I could imagine everyone else doesn't do it. So it's a kind of a strange situation where everyone says yes, I would still work even if I get money from the state. But I think most of the other ones would not.
Where would be a situation for you where you say, I would really engage for a peace solution there? What would it be? When would you personally say, I engage, I spend time, I really, get into it and want to solve the problem?
Within the current circumstances, with the current situation of both Israel and the current uprising state of Palestine, I'm totally not with what's going on. If I can stand with an idea, it will be the one-state solution. A Palestine and Israelis and Palestinians living within one state that represent them both, because Palestinians have the right to go back to their land, and let's say that Israelis also, they have not been born in this place, or let's say that their father maybe came from the US or came from England or came from Europe, but they still have rights, a nominal right in the country that they built, and it is a technology leading country, a very developed countries, but within the rights given to the people are quite great inside Israel, but when it goes to foreign policy, it's quite miserable situation in which if you don't like someone, oppress it to the maximum. So with Israel in the equation, I will never. I don't think that I'll ever sit with just a peace cause to go with. But for some reason, if the Israeli people stood up and say, okay, we don't want to, what is going on is not right, and we don't want to oppress Palestinians, oppress Arabs in general, I might be. But according to all studies being done to Israeli people, I told you, it's the problem is even among the people. You will find countries have problem with other countries like Syria and Turkey, but after a while, the government solved their problem, and people among all that time had a very good relationship. The problem was between countries. But when I speak about Palestine and Israel, it's and Arabs in general, the problem for me, and I speak with myself, with Israel as an idea. The book mentioned for a while that Theodor Herzl, the founder of the idea of the Jewish majority country, said, okay, it will be a Jewish majority country, but it will stay a secular state. But what we found now, it's completely a non-secular state. People that always say that they don't want a Muslim country any place on earth, but if you look to Israel, they're asking for they're not asking, they are actually applying the principle of a completely Jewish state, that if any other kind of minority within inside the state, it's threatened to be kicked out without any particular reason, but because they have a different beliefs from a newly majority that it came from different areas of the world and started oppressing the natively landowners of that land. So for me, I'm talking about myself. I will never just go with a peace. I'm even against with the peace treatment that's been done with Jordan, according to current circumstances and according to what Jordan had and what has the peace affected the Jordanian lifestyle. We didn't have any benefits of it, but all the disadvantages was we had just. I can't see one good thing that we had from the peace treaties. We had 1 F-16 airplanes, and 3 of them already crashed, and the other 7 are in a quite miserable situation. So otherwise, no. The army is a little bit better now, a little bit more weaponized, but comparing to the Israeli army, it's not that.
Do you fear, for example, you read a lot or you hear a lot actually about unrests in Palestine, people going on the streets,
To be honest, I always spoke about according to my Jordanian standards and according to the Jordanian people, but if I actually feel very pity, and let's say I don't hold a lot of respect to the Palestinian people for their own attitude and for the way that they stood to solve their problems with the Israelis. People in Tunisia, in Libya, and in Egypt, the people of these countries face regimes that much worse than Israel, in my opinion. If you look to Zain al-Abidin or Muammar Gaddafi or Mubarak, you can disappear from planet Earth with a flip of a finger, and no one can. But people with their bare hands, they faced aircraft, they faced bullets, they faced tanks, and they will not last. So I think if the Palestinians, they really want to solve their problem, they can solve it bare hands with no nothing. You have 8 million people. You have 8 million Palestinians in Jordan and in Palestine and in Lebanon. They can solve this problem. Even if they decided to march to Israel, just march, just walk, and you have your land back. But if you kept fighting for a government, for a state that it's not already born, you kept fighting just between like different kind of parties inside the Palestinian people, like Hamas and Fatah. They are fighting to have the power over a government. It's a government, but what does it control? Nothing. If the Israeli decided to cut the electricity, they can, just like that, they can cut it. If you decided you can't drink,
Right.
you will not drink.
So what you are basically saying, it could be in people's hand to do so. How would you feel then if Palestinians would march? What would your feeling as a Jordanian?
I will
would-
march. I will march with them. Just if I had to fight, I will fight also. Just all my. I came from a family. My grandfather used to be a commander at Jerusalem during war in 1948.
Okay.
And just he had many relatives that being killed, Jordanian, being killed in Palestinian, while defending what remained from Palestine during the war of 1948. And we didn't ask for anything back. Only just to stand up, to stand for something that we believe is right. So if the Palestinians had the courage to march, let's say, toward freedom, toward the salvation of themselves, they will. To tell you something, Jordanians have some kind of radical ideas more than Palestinians. You will find some Palestinian call, okay, we want peace with Israelis, but you will not find the same percentage of people within among the Jordanian people, because maybe we didn't experience just daily life with Israelis. So if you look to any normal Jordanian, most likely he will say, Israel, no bad idea. It's a bad idea. You should erase it. But
Okay.
if you face some Palestinians, you can find Palestinians working in building settlements now. The labor force in building settlements now, you can find many Palestinian working. And then at the same time, at the end of the day, they will ask, okay, stop the settlement.
Yeah, it's
Which
a
is
contradiction. Yeah.
It's a quite hypocrisy, I think, from the Palestinian people, which I started to lose a lot of respect to these
To the
people.
public.
Yeah.
Okay.
I always say that, okay, the Israelis have guns. Oh, they have guns. They can shoot. But when I saw what happened in Tunisia, what's happened in Egypt, what's going on in Libya now, you just, by any means necessary, you can get to the freedom. By any means. Until 1987, I'm sorry, we didn't face any public movement from the Palestinian people, even if they were under occupation, within the Israelis' territory or in the West Bank or Gaza. After 1988, which is a very long time period of occupation, they started to move. And I have many friends in the West Bank. I said, why didn't you go through another intifada or another revolution? They said, no, not
They're
anymore.
tired.
We're tired. We can't do it anymore.
Yeah. Where do you get your information from here? From Al Jazeera regarding Tunisia and regarding Egypt, or where do you?
About what?
What's going on there? Where do you get your information
BBC,
from?
BBC, Al Arabiya, and Al Jazeera, of course. But I also, let's say, internet. I'm also an internet activist. I get news from people through Facebook and Twitter.
When you say you are an activist, what for?
During university, I was a student right activist. To give, I'm not saying power, a little bit rights to the students during university life, to give them a little bit much respected way of living during university, not only to just to study. And studying alone is quite a problem, because the educational system in Jordan is descending now in higher education. But I'm also the freedom of speech in university. Let's say reducing the influence of tribalism in Jordanian universities and such kind of things. I also write about relations with tribal forces inside Jordanian community and Islamic and Palestinian forces inside the community, and what is, in my opinion, what is wrong and what is right in each side.
Okay.
May I briefly have a personal problem with this particular plan?
Yeah, of course.
You've talked about the security situation, which would advantage both of them if they were to become part of the United States. You're talking about a conventional military force, which Israel basically already possesses. It possesses total air superiority, even over surrounding states, allowing it to project power. For example, the 2007 raid on Syria, in which it destroyed a nuclear reactor. However, that kind of conventional military power, the security advantages that you're talking about, would not protect them in any way from the most likely violent reaction from Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, by extension of Iran. And it is unrealistic to expect anything else aside from a huge increase in terrorism against both states, or within the two states, or quite possibly all out war. Syria, Iran, having America basically on its borders in its region would challenge Iran's regional hegemony, and through its proxies, Hezbollah, and to some extent Hamas, it would conduct at the very least an unconventional war. And so many more people would die. That would be my point.
You working at the UK embassy here.
I did, briefly.
What does the UK do with these politic outreaches here for the peace process?
You mean in Jordan? Or
Here in the
middle?
region, yeah.
In the region. Well, I mean, it's a member of the group of nations which attempts to bring about peace. And I mean, it depends in what respect you mean. It takes part in negotiations in the best way that it can, and public opinion in the UK is overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian. There's some pro-Israel sentiment, but to a large degree in the government as well, there's a pro-Palestinian feeling.
And can't you imagine that this pro-Palestinian kind of thing would take over and also drive changes in the way politics are made in the UK and within the US?
I think it will. Investment in UK universities from the Middle East, particularly Saudi princes or from the UAE as well, is increasing. At my university, Exeter, received a huge grant from the Sheikh of Sharjah to build a centre for Arab and Islamic studies. And it's about changing the perceptions of future leaders. And I think that's the only way, really, that any change is going to come about in the perspective that the UK has on and its influence to change, its ability to influence and change the situation here. I think it will become more pro-Palestinian. As Pete says, I think the public perception is overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian. That's only going to get bigger, I think.
So this could really drive change. I mean, this is what I was going to say, you know, if the people in England, in Brussels, in Germany,